Hi, I'm Dave Henry. You're in my shop, in my garage, and I'm glad you're here. This video is about wooden hinges and wooden latches and clasps. What they are, why you might want to use them, and how to make them by an easy, versatile technique. Here are a few sample hinges, so you know what we're talking about. They're made from various woods. Here is a pair of maple hinges. This is made of mahogany, and it's made so that it opens 180 degrees compared to these. This is made of satiné. It is also 180 degrees, and it's made with the pivot point in a different place. This is an oak hinge, and it is made essentially to replace piano hinges like this that I have been using in past years. And finally, this is made of pine, and it's much bigger than the others, and it would be more suitable for a bigger project like a toy box. This one opens to 90 degrees. An obvious question to ask at this point is, why use wooden hinges? There is no shortage of metal hinges of varied size and shape, and these wooden hinges, they certainly don't look much like metal ones. Well, I have several answers to that question. My first answer is that wood hinges look pretty cool and different, to my eye at least. And also, as a woodworker, I like the appearance of only wood being visible in many of my projects.
To illustrate the point, here's a couple of treasure boxes made with wooden hinges and with wooden clasps as well. The first is made from holly and satiné, and the second from bubinga and ebony. They were made as gifts for my grandchildren. It's been 6 months now, and I'm happy to report that both boxes are holding up well. I should emphasize for the purists out there that these hinges aren't entirely wood. A metal pin is buried invisibly inside. For larger hinges, this could probably be replaced with a wooden dowel.
Other reasons you might want wooden hinges are that they can be custom made in the size and shape that you want, and with your choice of wood. And of course, being wood, they can be built with the many kinds of decorations that woodworkers do so well. For example, grooves and edgings and inlays and alternate woods and this kind of thing. They can add a lot to the appearance of a project. In my case, they also have the advantage of letting me avoid dealing with very small, fussy hardware, like so. I was put on to the idea when repeatedly faced with the precision installation of small piano hinges like this one into decorative boxes. Getting these almost microscopic little screws to go exactly where they had to be has been a continuous frustration. And wooden hinges, these wooden hinges at least, have made that problem go away. They're meant to be glued in place. Well, after all that introduction, what are we actually going to do in this video? Overall, we'll do three things. We'll make a hinge from this piece of mahogany showing all the details. We'll make a clasp also out of mahogany from this piece of wood.
And finally, we will mount these two pieces onto this small decorative bird's mouth joinery box.
First, we decide on the length of the hinge. In this case, a piano hinge type of application. The side of the box is 9.5 inches, and so we will make the hinge 8.5 inches long. That's right to here, and we'll cut it off there. Then draw two parallel lines with spacing equal to the thickness of the stock. That's here and down here. This dimension will be true for a hinge of any thickness. The starting two layout lines will be spaced at the thickness of the stock. That's important. This stock is 1/2 inch thick, and these two lines, of course, are then 1/2 inch apart. Next, draw a line exactly down the middle between the two first layout lines. That's now this line right here. This marks the location of the hinge pin, and a groove to receive the pin will be cut here by routing. Finally, decide on how many fingers you want in the hinge and insert cross lines. That's here, 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 and here accordingly. This one will have 5 fingers, 2 on one side and 3 on the other. In order to better understand what we're talking about, here's this oak hinge we have seen earlier. This has 7 fingers, 4 on the bottom and 3 on top. The first cutting step is by router, fitted with a round nose bit of the same diameter as the hinge pin, in this case 1/8 inch. And the groove we're going to put in will run right down the middle there. The hinge pin in this case is 1/8 inch steel rod, available at hardware stores. I got this at Home Depot. Brass and aluminum rod would be okay too, I'm sure. It will be dropped into a groove right there. Here's the router table setup. The depth of the hinge pin groove, down through here, should be the sum of 1/2 the thickness of the stock plus 1/2 the thickness of the pin. In this case, that's 1/4 of an inch plus a 1/16 of an inch, or 5/16 of an inch. I've set that already on the bit. This depth will center the hinge pin exactly 1/2 of the way through the stock. The groove through here can be cut the full length of the hinge, but it will then show on each end and will show in the final project. I prefer to use stop blocks, that is here, like here and here, in order to stop the groove from coming out the ends.
And that makes the hinge pin almost invisible in the completed project. Okay, let's cut that groove.
Here's the slotted hinge piece. Next, we're going to take the hinge pin, which now fits in there but is too long, and cut it to size. And there it is. Drops right in there. Now we're going to use this piece of 1/8 inch mahogany cut from the same stock as the hinge itself to make a plug for the slot that we've just made. It'll fit in there like so. We'll cut it to size. And in the finished hinge, this plug, now glued in place, will hold the pin in position and completely hide the pin. You won't be able to see it at all. Okay, here's the plug strip cut to length, but still wider than needed for the final hinge. We'll see why in a moment. I'll tap it into place, but without putting the pin in. That will go in later. And now we're ready to cut the hinge into its 2 parts. We're going to cut this on a scroll saw. Here's the business end of a scroll saw. And we're going to cut the piece as follows. I'm sure most of you will have figured this out already. We're going to start here, cut down to the first cross line, cut over, go down on the next line, cross over again, and then so on to the end.
Don't be misled by how fast the scroll saw cut seems to go. I've sped it up. The entire cut took about 8 minutes, and with harder woods such as ebony, it is even slower. It isn't too obvious in the video, but I found keeping to a straight line on the scroll saw takes a lot of concentration, and the cut often varies a bit from the line. Fortunately, this isn't a serious problem and can be compensated for in the rounding cleanup step that comes next. However, the more accurate is the scroll cut, the easier the cleanup.
Here's the hinge we've just cut. We've not only cut out the basic toothed shape, but we've cut the plug strips
into pieces of exactly the right length to fit each tooth.
It's handy to number each piece of plug strip because they will likely be in and out of position several times before final assembly, and they easily get mixed up. I've taken the plug strips out, and our next step is to round off the teeth of the hinge. As you can see from this finished hinge, rounding is necessary, as in here and here, in order to allow the tooth to rotate around the hinge pin.
For rounding this mahogany hinge, a rasp seemed to work best, but I have often used a block plane or just sandpaper. You can also use a roundover bit in the router. Here's a close-up of the result. Now onto the two-finger or two-tooth part of the hinge. I use the two terms tooth or finger interchangeably when I'm talking about it. Sorry about that. Here's a close-up of the two-fingered part.
Okay, now that we've got everything rounded off, let's reassemble and see if we've actually got a working hinge going here. Okay, there's everything together. Now, does it work? Let's see. All right, there we go. We have a working hinge. Now, let's just take it apart again, and then we will glue it together permanently.
Here's the final assembly procedure. Put the hinge pin into the three-finger part of the hinge, and then rub the exposed parts of the hinge pin with bar soap or paraffin. This will inhibit the squeaking noise that often is noticeable with wooden hinges such as these. Take out the hinge pin now and put a dab of glue in each slot of the three-fingered half and reinsert the pin. The hinge pin will now be fixed to this half and not be able to rotate. Put the second part of the hinge in place. The whole hinge should be laying on a flat surface, of course. Now glue in the plug strips. They should be carefully centered. On the three-finger half, letting glue get into the bottom of the slot is no problem. On the two-finger half, keep glue out of the bottom of the slot to avoid gluing the pin to the wood. In general, of course, avoid getting glue into the wooden moving parts. After the glue sets, I trim off the extra plug strip with the bandsaw.
Okay, here's the hinge with the plug strip all sanded down smooth now. It's right in here, but you probably can't even see it. It doesn't show very much. The next step is the latch. Here it is laid out on the piece, cut to its approximate dimensions. Here are the two layout lines that I said were important for guiding the construction of hinges, right here and here. And down the middle is the line that will now serve to locate the groove that we'll be cutting shortly. And finally, this oval shape will be the shape of the clasp, and we will be cutting out through here. Okay, let's do the cutting.
As before, route the hinge pin groove with stop blocks. Same depth of cut. Next, we'll make the oval shape using a disc sander. As you can see, I've inserted a plug strip into the clasp in the same way and for the same purpose as in the hinge. Now we'll do those scroll saw cuts. By the way, don't use me for a model for scroll saw use. Before this hinge project came along, I had never used one before, and I still have a hard time doing good right angles and straight lines. Fortunately, a properly working hinge doesn't require a high level of skill. Okay, there's the cut out latch. For this latch, only the center tooth needs rounding, as shown here. Here are all of the latch parts, already rounded and squared. I dry assembled them off camera and everything fits. Let's glue it up. These are the same steps as with the hinge assembly, but simpler because of fewer teeth. As before, be careful not to put glue between moving wooden parts.
Here are the hinge and the clasp ready for final shaping and smoothing. I'm going to round over the outer edges of both the clasp and the hinge before installation on the box. As you can see on the clasp, the sanded down plug strip shows quite a bit more than it did on the hinge. But since that's the side of the clasp that will be glued down, approximately like so, it doesn't matter. Okay, there is one additional cut, important cut to be made in the clasp that is best made after final shaping. We need to make a cut in the clasp corresponding to the separation of the lid from the bottom of the box. And that'll be made here and over here. Okay, here are the completed hinge. That'll work pretty much like that. Here's the completed clasp, and that will work something like that. Both have been rounded and smoothed completely. They're ready for installation on the box. Here are those two cuts that I said had to be done before we were finally done with the clasp. Okay, let's glue them on. The first step is to glue the hinge to the body of the box, and that'll be done by gluing the bottom half, that is the three-fingered half of the hinge, to the outside of the box. It needs to be centered, of course. The key feature of that placement is to get the break line between the two halves of the hinge just flat with the edge of the box. That makes the hinge action work correctly. Okay, the lower half of the hinge has been glued to the box body, and the upper half now is ready to be glued to the lid of the box. The only alignment we need to worry about here is that the lid is perfectly aligned with the body of the box.
Let's clamp that up and let it dry.
The next step is gluing the clasp to the lid. There are two alignments that are important here. First, centering the clasp on the lid. Here you can see I have the two center lines lined up, and aligning the clasp with the bottom edge of the lid. I can show that by lifting the lid. That key alignment is aligning the bottom edge of the clasp, that's here and here, with the bottom edge of the lid down here. Okay, we're ready to glue it up. Okay, let's take the clamps off of that. And let's see about this. Yeah, everything's fine. Okay, the last thing we have to do is glue these parts of the clasp in place, and we are fully in business. For the last step in gluing on the clasp, clamp the lid to the bottom of the box so nothing can move while you're working. Then slide the remaining pieces into place and decide exactly where you want to place them. If the blocks are pushed down in this direction so that they touch the hanging part of the clasp, that is this, then the clasp will have a friction lock when it's closed. If the blocks are placed higher, that is like so, pushed in this direction, then this part will not touch the blocks and will simply hang in place when the clasp is closed. This is a somewhat delicate adjustment. After the glue up, you may want to add material to this surface. For example, glue in a bit of wood shavings. Or possibly you might need to sand something off in order to get the exact fit that you want. I'm going to go for the friction fit.
Okay, let's do the gluing. As with all of these hinge clasp glue-ons, be careful not to use too much glue. The excess may squeeze out where you don't want it. These last two pieces are just pressed into place and exactly positioned by sliding before the glue sets. I don't use clamps at this step to avoid moving the carefully placed pieces.
Okay, the glue is dry. Let's see how this clasp works.
Looks just fine. Okay, next time you see this box, it will be a completed project, finish and all. I'll do the finishing off camera.
At last, here is the finished box. It is finished with an oil polyurethane wipe-on over a shellac sealer. The clasp works like it's supposed to, but it's a bit tighter than it was before I finished the box. The hinge works like it should as well, and I'll show you that, and that brings us back to the beginning where this video started. That's it, folks. Now you know all my secrets about these wooden clasps and hinges. Give them a try on your next hinged project, and I think you'll be very pleased with the results. I'll finish with another 2 shots of our oh so classy wooden hinge box. See you next time.